So as you all know, I was the type of gambler who loved to die by 1,000 little bets. You've heard me say it a million times. I loved the long shots, hated the stuff that paid even money. If I have $100 and my two options were option one, $100 on a hand of blackjack, or option two, making 20 straight $5 bets on a 30-1 shot like snake eyes being rolled on the craps table, I'm taking option two every time. Not only because I want the action of those 20 straight rolls, but I'm only risking $5 for a chance to win 150. And shit, what if it hits more than once? This long shot, loser, pipe dream, what if mentality was never more apparent than when I would bet sports, especially during football season. Let's say there's 10 1 o'clock games on any given Sunday. I'm betting at least 8 of them, if not all 10. And not just straight up. I'm doing teases. I'm doing parlays. Anything to make the payout higher, which obviously makes the odds of you winning lower. And then, of course, after the 1 o'clock games, I'm most likely going to be down money. So now I have to bet every 4 o'clock game. And then you put yourself in a position that every gambler, whether they're compulsive or not, tends to put themselves in. It's that miserable, desperate, anxiety-ridden moment of every Sunday night between September and the end of January when you're listening to Carrie Underwood or whoever the fuck is singing the Sunday Night Football theme song at the time, knowing that this is it, last chance. Do I lay off and just take the loss for the week? Do I make a sizable bet to try to knock the number down, hope for a carryover? Do I make a huge bet so that if I win, I'm even? But of course, if I lose, I'm fucked. Now, September 2017, it was a little different for me this year, though. The 1 o'clock games were now at 10 a.m. because in case you don't know how time works on the West Coast, we were 3 hours behind. Or ahead. We're behind. I was still dabbling with bookies, but the majority of my betting was done in the Vegas sports books. Another example of me trying to control my addiction. I can remember saying, listen, betting through the sports books, you have to put up the money. You can't bet with money you don't have, like I've done so many times through a bookie. So I would make a morning out of every Sunday. Didn't have to set the alarm. I'd be at Santa Fe by 9 a.m., ready to do my research. I'd find myself one of those little cubicles in the sports book that had its own little mini TV and a lamp. I had my scrap paper and all my big white sheets with all the different lines and prop bets. Every game was being played on one of those 50 gigantic screens at the front of the room like any other big Vegas sports book. I'm not going to lie. Thinking about it right now, my disease, which is buried under miles of concrete and recovery, thinking about this, it gives me a little ting, a little something, because those Sundays were fun. But now, here's what I do. And I've learned to do this in recovery. Let's honestly and truthfully think about that for a second. So I just said that it was fun, right? Those were fun days? Okay. First off, what was so fun about it? Was it the fact that you were alone? Was it fun that you almost never won? Was it fun that you sat in the same chair for like 10 hours unless you were walking to and from a slot machine to take a break? What was so fucking fun? It wasn't fun. But I guess, if I'm being honest, like you could say it was more fun than how I typically gambled. Just being honest. But I've heard it in these rooms, and I've probably said it on the pod before. My worst day sober, my worst day in recovery is still better than my best day gambling. But yeah, I guess you could say it was more fun than how I typically gambled. Instead of being alone at a slot machine at 2 a.m., I was in a crowded room full of people that were constantly cheering for one of the 10 games that were going on. And there was no chance I'd be walking in and then walking out 5 minutes later broke. I made sure I spread my bets out throughout the day, so I always had something to watch. Think of it this way. The feeling that I got from a good craps roll, basically any roll over 10 to 15 minutes. And yes, most craps rolls are less than 10 minutes. Most are less than 5 minutes. But that one good roll out of every 20, that 10-minute window is so euphoric. It's so intoxicating. It's what kept me going. After 18 or 19 straight losses, and I was thinking that I was possibly done, you have that one roll out of 20 where you hit a few hard sixes or you turn 500 into $3,000 and your disease-ridden brain wipes away all of those losses. And essentially the disease resets and you're back in the dream world. So take that feeling, bottle it up, dilute it a little bit, but then instead of it lasting for 10 minutes, extend it over 3 hours. And that's me watching a football game that I have money on. Now, I say dilute it because once you place a bet on a football game, you're either going to win what you bet or you're going to lose. There's no what if. Even if it's a big parlay, you know you're either going to lose the $20 or you're going to win the 800 if all 6 legs hit. But a craps roll or a slot machine, you don't know what you could win. That's why the euphoric feeling is so much more intense and concentrated. The sky's the limit. What if this is the craps roll of my lifetime? But yeah, when I bet football, unless it was a blowout, which if you're betting against the spread, it doesn't happen as often as you might think. For those 3 hours watching that game, I'm not watching it excited for the level of play or excited for 2 rivals or even my beloved Patriots. I'm looking at every one of those TV screens in that sports book with a dollar amount attached to it, depending on what I bet. And that was me every Sunday while I lived in Vegas for that football season. But if you're paying attention to my story, you might be thinking, Adam, how can you do this if you're always broke by Friday? You work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at Aria, and then you're usually broke shopping at Walmart with $5 in your pocket. Great point, Modern Meeting listener. So what I did was I got some other part-time dealing jobs. I worked at 2 off-strip casinos, South Point, and I worked at the Orleans. And I hated both of them, and I quit within a few months. Shocker, I know. But I will tell you a big reason of why I quit South Point. So I'm getting onboarded, and the HR woman is running through what I need to do the next few days in order to be ready to work. You got 2 forms of ID? That's her voice. You got 2 forms of ID? Yep. You can pick up your uniforms in our office on the 2nd floor. Okay, great. Your orientation will be Monday the 28th from 9 to 3, business casual. Okay, awesome. And you need to be clean shaven. That's about it. I'm sorry, what? What? Clean shave, like completely clean shaven? Yeah, we have a no facial hair policy. What about like a goatee? You can have a mustache, a neatly trimmed mustache. And I'm laughing at her. I'm like, so you're serious? She's like, yeah, he's old school. The owner. It was one guy who owned South Point, apparently, at this point. And he thought he was running the fucking New York Yankees. So I told her, okay, but I left there with this dilemma. Am I really going to shave my face, my fat fucking face, because I'm going to work here part-time and do my usual bullshit and sign the EO? I have to walk around like this? I did it. And I avoided mirrors for the couple months that I worked there. You ever try to brush your teeth without looking in the mirror? It's weird, but I did. I still had hair at the time, so it wasn't completely ridiculous. I didn't look like a gigantic baby, but it was not far off. But I will say this. If we ever get to, what's a crazy number? If and when we ever get to 10,000 followers on Instagram, I will shave my face for a week. I'll shave it one time and then just let it grow back. All right, 5,000 followers. Welcome to the Modern Meeting. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Modern Meeting. My name is Adam. I'm a compulsive gambler. My last bet, February 8th, 2022. Jen, I miss you. This sucks. Second week in a row. This is the fifth time I have started the episode. I'm looking at my phone again. The cat is sleeping. It's fucking 2:23 in the morning, and yeah, it's tough. It's really tough to do this because I can't write my little script like I do with the cold open because I'm supposed to look at the camera, but who says I'm supposed to look at the camera? Maybe I just don't look at the camera. Okay, I don't know. Anyways, this is the Dave Yeager episode. Dave is the man. I don't think I said it during the interview, but I will say it now. Dave, thank you for your service. He is an 11-year veteran of the U.S. Army. And Dave's story is unique because he started gambling late in life. It was after 9/11 when he was in Korea. I won't give away the story, but that's where he kind of started gambling, and he struggled with it for a lot of years. And his story it's a lot, you know. It's in the description of the episode, but I do want to just say that this episode contains discussions of suicide and mental health, which may be distressing for some of you. If you or someone you know is struggling, please consider seeking support. Help is available in the U.S. You can contact the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. It's available 24/7. You know, it's an important part of Dave's story, but it is still, you know, very, very tough to listen to nonetheless. You know, speaking of stories, I know I say it all the time, but I can't tell you how powerful it is to hear a new story, right? And that's what the Modern Meeting essentially is all about. Like, that is at our core, is that we want to tell stories. We want to share our stories. We want to hear people's stories. And that's the connection, you know, like, and that's what this episode is called, The Power of Connection. And that is what Dave did for me. And that's what so many of the previous guests have done for so many people that have reached out to me and told me, oh, I heard this story, I heard that story, really resonated with me. So please, if you want to be one of those people to come on the pod, would love to have you. Last thing before we get to Dave, the Modern meeting is going to happen. Still closing in on figuring out what day, what time, how we're going to work, but Jen and I have begun to start figuring everything out. We will keep you guys posted on that. Very excited for that. Hope to be able to continue to break this stigma and spread some awareness and get all of us coming together. And once again, it can be a blank screen and you're just there to listen. That's the goal, is to just get people to share their stories if they're ready, and if not, for someone to just be able to listen. And my phone just died, so the last few moments of this is going to be dramatic pause. That is where my phone died, and this is irrelevant if you are listening, but if you're watching, you are now looking at a picture of me and Drew on a New York City subway in April of 2014, and this is the closest thing I have to what I must have looked like in Vegas, clean shaven. This guy means business. He's got the eyeglasses with the sunglasses and the shirt, classic. I didn't graduate to prescription sunglasses quite yet. And the hair, oof, and yeah, pretty close to clean shaven. And it's not pretty. So this gives you guys an idea. And Drew, you guys can go look at Drew's face. Classic Drew. But yeah, so let's get down to business. And this week, like I said, an amazing conversation. U.S. Army vet Dave Yeager. He's an author. He travels around the country helping veterans and military members, telling his story. So let's get to it. Here is my conversation with Dave. Alrighty, so today we have a very special guest. He is an 11-year veteran of the U.S. Army and also happens to be in recovery for a gambling addiction. He's the founder and creator of Fall In Problem Gambling Resources, which aims to raise awareness about gambling addiction among military service members and veterans. Among those resources, under the Fall In umbrella, he hosts a podcast and a YouTube channel. And most recently, he has written a book entitled Fall In, A Veteran with a Gambling Addiction. Please welcome to the Modern Meeting, Dave Yeager. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been so awesome to I've kind of been brought into the fold a little bit of the community, and I met you in person, well, not in person, but via Zoom the other day. And yeah, happy to have you here.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's so cool when we start to expand out like this to raise awareness and to get the word out there, you know.
Absolutely. So, I want to get right into it. It's fun. So we're talking maybe March of 2022. I started listening to Brian Hatch's podcast,
Hmm.
and I know that you were a regular on that podcast. And so when I heard your voice and I saw you, it like brought me back to those days, which is awesome. But before we get into your story, before we go back to the beginning, I always ask the same question to everybody. The first question: do you remember the moment when you realized that you had a problem with gambling?
To pin it down to a singular moment, I would say no, but to remember when I knew I had a problem, yes, I do. And it was it's part of my story that I tell. It's actually when I was in Korea right after 9/11, the year after 9/11. I got there in November 2001, left in November 2002, and there was a time in the spring of 2002 when I was gambling so much and I had done enough damage at that point where I was like, this is a problem for me. Like it went from this is fun to I have to do this. And I noticed it. I noticed the change.
And so you were doing this in Korea while like on active duty?
Yeah. I what I didn't know at the time, and just to give you a little bit of background,
Yeah.
a few months before that, probably 6, 8 months before that, I was a station in the States,
Mm-hmm.
in my first marriage, 2 young children, both under the age of 6, right?
Mm.
Things are going along, and I'm considering getting out of the Army at that time. I was coming up on the end of my enlistment, and I'm like, "Okay, do I wanna get out and just get a civilian job so we can stabilize?" Because one of the things about the military life is every 2 to 3 years you're moving,
Right.
right? Even if you're not deployed or anything like that, every 2 to 3 years, you're packing everything up and going.
Mm.
And with 2 young kids, I just didn't know if I wanted to do that anymore. So there was a lot of back and forth between me and my first wife because, and rightly so, she saw the stability in the military lifestyle, getting a steady paycheck. There was no conflict at that point. This was pre 9/11, and all that. And so there was already some back and forth when all this happened. So I ultimately decided, okay, I'm going to reenlist. I'm going to do my year in Korea. And then after this enlistment, we get a couple more years in, we'll see what happens from there. So I reenlisted, and lo and behold, a few months later, 9/11 happened.
Mm.
I knew I was going away for a year already. I was already going to be separated from my family for a year. I came down on the orders to 9/11. Um, a little bit after that, I get on the plane. I fly over to Korea in November of 9/11. I get down there, they bust me from Osan Air Base, which is where we landed. And by the way, the first thing I noticed that unnerved me flying into Osan is that there's Patriot missiles pointed at us, right? Plus, then you start to see all the wire that had gone up and all the barriers that had gone up, and
Mm.
it's a little unnerving if you're not used to it, right?
Sure.
Now, I'd already seen the barriers around my installation back in the States, so I was already prepared for it, but it's still unnerving. So we get off the plane. They bus us up to Seoul, which is a couple hours away, right, to Yongsan Base, which at the time was the headquarters for the whole peninsula. They get us put up in a really, really nice hotel right on the base, right? Comparatively, it's about a 4-star hotel. They get us in there. I drop my stuff off in my room. I go get something to eat. I'm walking around the hotel lobby and I start hearing noises and I'm like, what is this? And I look around the corner and here's a casino style slot room right there on the installation, right there in the hotel. And it threw me off because they don't exist here in the States. They
Mm.
only exist in overseas installations, and they're there to raise money for morale, welfare, and recreation programs to help provide things like bowling alleys and trips. And, for people like me who are stationed away from my family, it helps to raise money to provide all that. Right.
Mm.
So I was like, okay, what the heck? I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania. So when I grew up, I used to go to Atlantic City in my 20s and I would take some money with me and I'd be able to spend that money and go home. So I'm like, all right, I take a couple hundred out. I go sit down for a while until I can relax and then I'll go to bed and try to sleep because I was also 12 hours off, right? The time
Right.
change alone threw me off. So I go get a couple $100 out. I sit down in front of a machine and I start playing. And one of the first things I notice is my shoulders are relaxing. I'm getting more comfortable. I'm feeling better. I'm like, okay, this is going to work. And then I made the biggest mistake a budding addicted gambler could ever make, and I won. Right.
Mm.
And I hardly broke the bank. I want to say it wasn't, maybe it was $1,000 at the most. Didn't matter. In that moment, all of that stress, all of that worry, all of that pain, everything I was going through in that moment was gone.
So
Right.
you're saying that leading up to that moment, you were able to just recreationally gamble and you never had a problem up until that moment?
I had not noticed a problem with and I did not gamble a bunch. When I was in my
Right.
20s, I gambled in Atlantic City. But to be honest with you, between that time and the time that I had gone to Korea, which was, at least a decade in between there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really hadn't gambled a whole lot, so I couldn't tell you whether I had had a problem or not because I
Right,
just
right,
didn't do it. It didn't interest me,
right.
you know, until
So
I got there and I saw this room and I'm like, man, this looks fun. Let me go relax for a little bit, you know?
unreal. So take me through that year. So how did it progress while you were there?
So I left from there and I went down to my base, which was at the southern end of the peninsula in Busan. I was actually the non-commissioned officer in charge of two squads, one in Busan and one an hour north of there in Daegu.
Mm.
So I had, I don't know, it's about 15 soldiers I was responsible for. Got settled into the base, got settled into my quarters. That weekend I found the community club, which is basically the bar and restaurant on post, and attached to it is another one of these rooms. So it started off as a Friday night. I'd go in there to relax, just like I did in Seoul. It wasn't long before that turned into Friday, Saturday night, started turning into Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. Then it became Monday night. And I would say probably within about 2 to 3 months, I went from just occasionally going in there to relax to going in there on almost a daily basis. And the feeling moved from this is fun, a nice little getaway to I need to go to this room, right? Like this is my getaway, my safe space.
So now this room, and this might be a dumb question, but was it the US Army that made this room, or was it a room that already existed that was in Korea that just happened to be?
No, the Army put that in. The Army funds these rooms in overseas military installations across the world. Now, you won't find them in a combat theater. You wouldn't have found them in Afghanistan,
Right,
Iraq, or
right.
anything like that. But in Germany, Japan, Korea, anywhere where there has been an established military presence, they still exist in Germany. They still exist in Korea. They still exist in Japan, Okinawa. They're still there,
And
and the military
regular
built
slot
these rooms.
machines.
Yeah,
Regular slot machines.
yeah,
Wow.
they're the one they had the regular one-armed bandits, the traditional style. They had some of the more digital ones. Now they even have some of the more, the updated digital ones. The video slot machines are in there now. It looks very similar to a slot floor in any casino you'd walk into.
Oh my God. I mean, so not to be bouncing around all over the place, but I mean, I have to ask, like, since you have started your work in the recovery space, have you made any headway with like raising awareness and talking to the armed forces about like what these rooms ended up doing to you?
I'm going to say bits and pieces,
Yeah.
right? I've had conversations with different organizations attached to the military environment that have asked questions. So I had
Mm.
one group, and I can't go into too much detail, but I had one group of individuals from the government actually interview me, and they were getting ready to go around and do a study of a couple of bases here in the U.S. and then a couple overseas, and asked me things to look for. Right, like they said, "Do you want me to go ask? Do you want us to go ask soldiers about whether or not these rooms are a problem for me?" I said, "No." Do you want me to ask their commanders? I said, no. Ask their non commissioned officers, the people that are directly in charge of them, not whether they have a gambling problem, but whether they notice they're disappearing more, they have more money problems, they're becoming more detached, and that sort of thing, because, they just, a lot of times these guys don't know the questions to ask. Because if you walk up to a soldier, a sailor, marine, airman, and say, do you have a gambling problem? Right? This is the first thing you're going to see. Hell no, I don't have a gambling problem. Why are you even asking me that damn question? I remember when I was first recruited into the Army, my recruiter looked at me and he does exactly this. He goes, have you ever smoked marijuana? Right? And I looked at him and he said, "Let me ask you again." And his head again, side to side, "Have you ever smoked?" And that's kind of what it is, because there's a huge stigma around it, because it's treated still to some extent in the military as a disciplinary issue and a money issue, and
Mm,
not as a mental health issue and an addiction. Whereas drugs and alcohol in the military, there's aligned protocols. There's lined up protocols. If somebody has an alcohol problem, if it's not too serious or too much damage hasn't been done, they're put into a treatment program to try to get them back into the field, to try to get them up and running. Drugs are a little more serious. They're treated a little more seriously, and for good reason, but still there's protocols to help them back. For the gambler, even though there's written things out there that are appearing more and more, there's really no protocol for the gambler other than to treat it as a disciplinary issue and a money issue.
yeah. So so you're in Korea. Take me through what happens next in your gambling. And now, so what's your clean date?
As of now, it's January 6th of 2020.
Okay, so January 6th of 2020. So we have there's like an 18-year gap I want to hear about. So
I
once you
actually have two clean dates, Adam. I have two.
Oh, okay. Well, so
My
let's
first clean date is June 18th, 2007, just so you know.
wow. Okay. So take me from so you're in Korea for a year. What happens next?
Okay, so it's getting worse. I start as I'm on my weekend call with my wife. I'm giving her different excuses to send me more money. Hey,
Mm,
we're going on this trip. Hey, this soldier needs this. Hey, I need to buy that. And she's doing it because I had an account set up over there. She'd transfer the funds into the account. She had no access to it, so I could do whatever I wanted with it. And of course, I plucked it right out and I went right to the room with it.
mm,
So eventually she started saying, "Come on, you don't have that much stuff you need extra money for. I'm going back to what I was sending you." So that ran out. Right now, of course, as this is happening, my need to go is building.
mm,
And as you know, there's only so much you're going to win gambling. Eventually, the losses are going to outweigh the wins. And it did. So when I ran out of that money, the next thing I did is took almost all the stuff I brought with me. I had a really nice bicycle I had to ride around. I had electronic equipment. I had all this stuff. I just sold it. Right. I sold
mm.
it to continue being able to continue to go into this room thinking, oh, well, I'm just going to make the big win and it's not going to matter. I'll have all that money. I'll buy it back.
And what
Um,
what what was like the big win? What's the most that you could have won on one of these machines?
there were no that I remember any types of progressive slots or anything like that.
Right. So
So
maybe
if
like
you
four
won,
thousand quarters or something. Or
yeah, if you walked away with $1,000, $2,000, you were doing pretty good.
right. Okay.
Um, but that didn't matter. I mean,
And at the
this was
height of
bells
it,
and whistles.
right. But at the height of it, like what were you possibly losing in a week in Korea in the rooms?
I would say probably because I didn't have access to tons and tons of money, but I would say probably that same thousand a week.
Right.
Um,
Right. So you're looking to break
yeah,
even at that point if you hit the big
even
if
if
you
I
hit
had
the big
won,
one.
right? Which obviously
Right.
I didn't, so I never broke even. So
Exactly.
yeah, and eventually the money from selling everything ran out, and that's when I started. I was getting so obsessed by that point. I'm probably about halfway through my tour at this point. I'm getting so obsessed that I start quote unquote thinking outside the box. Right. First of all, I was a smoker. At the time I smoked and I was smoking about a pack of cigarettes a day. It was helping quote unquote with my stress. Well, I didn't buy cigarettes anymore because I needed that money to gamble with. So what I would do is walk around the base and I'd go into all the little sand ashtrays they had and I'd pull all the little butts people would put out in there and I'd get real happy when I found the long ones. Yeah, I knew there was a disease risk, didn't really care. Right? I just wanted the cigarettes to smoke and I wasn't willing to spend the money on them because I wanted that money for my gambling. So then I started doing things that started to become outside of my character. And I want to preface this first though, Adam. What I want to say is during this time, I earned the expert field medical badge. It's one of the hardest badges to earn in the Army, right? I got promoted. I got a couple of my soldiers promoted. I developed a training system, a field training system that my commander liked so much. He said, "Hey, can I use this in other squads in the peninsula because I really like it?" So all these great things are happening. Meanwhile, on the other side, right, here's Mr. Hyde starting to develop while Dr. Jekyll's doing all this good stuff.
Yeah, leading that
Mr.
double
Hyde's
life.
rearing
Yeah.
his ugly head, and I need to go. I got to go. I got to go. I got to go. But I'm out of money. Where am I going to get money? I know I can pay it back. So I started borrowing from my subordinates. And if you know anything about being a non-commissioned officer in the military, no, no,
Mm,
no, 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 right? And I got away with it for a while. I
mhm,
got away with it until I didn't, until you could see the respect of my subordinates started to wither away, until you could see that they were saying, look, I'm sorry, I can't keep doing this.
mm,
And eventually that money ran out. Now it's getting closer to the end of my tour, and this is a full-blown obsession at this point. There's no way I can't go to this room. Now I'm going at lunchtime, right? Now, because I was the non-commissioned officer in charge on a very small overseas base, a lot of the enlisted leaders would have meetings every week, first sergeant meetings. And even though I wasn't a first sergeant, which is kind of near the top of that local unit, I was still invited to those meetings. So I would make up meetings for my officer in charge and say, hey, I have to go to this NCO meeting. And I would go over to the game room. Now I'm making excuses. And it got to the point where it got so bad that we had a petty cash fund in our unit that I ended up stealing.
mm.
I knew right where it was. I knew right how to get to it. Now, you're not talking thousands of dollars, but it doesn't matter. It's
Doesn't
on a
matter.
US government installation, right?
Mm,
And the thought running through my head as I'm taking this money out is, oh, yeah, I'm just going to win it and put it back. It's no big deal. Nobody's even going to notice. Meanwhile, at the same time, right next to that thought is the thought of, man, you're just going to sit there and blow this until it's gone. Don't do it.
mm.
And both of these thoughts are occurring at the same time. And I know you understand what I'm about to say. Imagine the conflict going on in my brain while both of these thoughts are fighting each other at exactly the same time.
Yep. It's you versus the disease.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So what
Yeah.
happened?
So I ultimately took the money
Mm-hmm.
and I went and I gambled it away as expected. I walked away with nothing. And not too long after, maybe the next day, an investigation was started because, of course, my officer in charge noticed the petty cash was missing.
Mm,
And so the Criminal Investigation Division, the CID, started their investigation. And I said, just stop, stop. Let's find an office and sit down. And immediately confessed what I had done because I was so ashamed of what I had done at that point. And I didn't know what was happening to me. It's so weird because I knew what was happening. I knew an obsession was growing, but I had no idea what was really going on, that a disease was developing within me, that I had an addiction forming. I thought, what kind of weirdo have I become?
mm,
You know, I have these insane thoughts in my head. I'm obsessed. I can't stop doing this stuff. I need to stop, and I don't know how.
mm,
So I just pulled them aside and I said, "This needs to stop. Let me tell you what I did." So I was immediately pulled out of my position, and rightly so. That has to happen in that instance, right? You
mm-hmm.
can't. There's no excuse to get around that. I did the things that I did, and I had to own that. So, and then not long after that, I was sent back to my headquarters in Seoul because number one, it was about a month away from my 1 year tour being over. But number two, I had to be disciplined. They needed to know what to do with me. So I get down there. They put me into this administrative role where I'm doing file work and clerk work and things like that. And my commander finally calls me in for the conversation with him. A colonel, by the way, that out of all my time in the army, there are very few people I respect at the level that I respected this guy. Um, very above board, very upfront. He does what he says he's going to do. A great person of character. Sits me down, looks me in the eye, and goes, I don't know what to do with you. He said, you're doing all these great things for our unit, and then there's this character and money thing, you know? And I'm not angry with the fact that he said there's this character and money thing and not, hey, there's a gambling addiction. What bothers me was the lack of understanding, in hindsight, because then I didn't know.
Right.
But now as I look back, I think, man, I wish they would have known that this is a real addiction and maybe could have addressed it a different way. I'm not saying I shouldn't have been punished. I'm not saying that. I was rightly punished. What I'm saying is it should be set alongside of, by the way, it seems like you might have a gambling addiction. Let's get you to somebody so you can get some help.
So
That makes sense.
that's yeah, absolutely. And so my question is, at that time, 2002 or whenever it was, if you had come to them and said you had a drug problem or an alcohol problem, what was the protocol for that?
There is a whole policy manual that you follow. It depends on the severity of the addiction. It depends on if there's any crimes attached to it. Of course, there's a lot. But if I walked in there and I said, listen, I'm I'm finding myself in the community club more. I'm drinking almost every day. It hasn't affected my work yet, but I think I might have an alcohol problem.
Right.
There's basically a program, there are tracks or programs they can send you to help rehabilitate you to get you back out in the field,
Right.
you know.
But so there was, at that time, there was nothing in place for gambling.
And to this day, there really still isn't anything in place for gambling.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So so did they ultimately, were you discharged, or did you get to finish out your tour?
No, for that particular instance, let me finish that part of it because
Yeah.
first of all, I got reduced by one rank, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was a staff sergeant at the time. I got reduced to sergeant and basically was sent on to my next unit, right? But right after that, then I met with my first sergeant, who is my enlisted leader, to do my end of year non-commissioned of officers evaluation report. This is my year-end report to see how I did by being the NCOIC. I got almost top scores in just about every category except for character, right? So I got poor scores, obviously, in that area because of the things that I had done. That's how disconnected this was. They pointed out all these great things I'd done, and that's the reason I was only reduced by one rank because of all the good things I was doing as a non-commissioned officer. And that's not meant as a brag. It's meant to point out you know, how much this addiction can divide us within our own brain. We call it the hidden addiction because we hide it from other people, but we can hide it from ourselves too, you
Absolutely.
know? Yeah. So I got reduced by one rank. I got my non-commissioned officer evaluation report done, and then I was sent on my way.
Okay. So
Um,
now, and you decided to leave the Army at that point?
no, I had a few more years ahead of me before that happened. I got back to the States. I moved on to my next duty station, which was South Carolina. Meanwhile, my family was in Wisconsin, which is where we had been stationed prior to that.
Mm,
I moved on. It was in December, I want to say. I moved down to South Carolina. They stayed until the following June so my kids could finish their school year.
mm.
So I, of course, now I'm on my own in South Carolina. So naturally, what do? Right? I eventually, and it didn't happen quickly, but eventually I started to gamble again.
Now, because yeah, I
Um,
was going to ask, because like when I declared bankruptcy at 28, and I was so embarrassed and I was so ashamed. I didn't gamble for a few months. When all that went down, do you remember how you felt in that moment, and did it prevent you from gambling at least a little while?
it scared the hell out of me.
Right.
Yes, because I loved my career.
Mm,
I loved the fact that I had done the things I'd done in my career and moved forward and contributed. So it scared the hell out of me. No, I'm not doing this again. I'm not doing this again. But then you get back home, and that's one thing within the military lifestyle is people don't realize what a readjustment period looks like for somebody who's been away. Even if you're not deployed into a combat theater, when you're moving around constantly and you're away from your family and mom steps in and takes on the role of both mom and dad and the dynamic changes in the house and you're out there on your own basically being single for a year, even though I wasn't, right? Now I wasn't out there cheating or anything, but I was out just being me and taking care of me.
yeah.
Now you put everybody back together in the same household and everybody expects it to go back to what it was and knows it's not going back to what it was at the same time,
Mm,
right? There's tension, there's stress. I remember my first wife, to this day, she'll say to me, when you came back to Korea, you were not the same person. Um, and it was because I was in a totally different dynamic, a different environment. Plus, by the way, I was developing an addiction.
mm.
But when I first got back from Korea, no, I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done with it. Let me put this behind me. Let this be gone. Right.
So then, what triggered you to go back out when you were in South Carolina?
Loneliness and life stress.
Yeah.
I was down there by myself. I once again missed the hell out of my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was put into a new position down there, which I loved. I loved the position. But I was alone.
Mm,
I had nobody and I was bored. Now, they didn't have casinos in that part of South Carolina when I was there. The only one that I knew of was multiple hours away at the other end of the state. So I started playing scratch off lottery. I'm like, okay, I'm bored. Let me do this. This
mm-hmm.
is not slot machines. I can get away with this,
Right.
That turned into rather quickly, within a couple of months, an obsession to the point where not too far into that tour, it was a Saturday. Now, when you're in the military and you want to go anywhere on a weekend, anywhere further than 50 miles away, you got to get permission from your leadership to do it, which more often than not, they'll say yes, just so they know where you are, right?
Mm.
Well, I had decided I ran out of money and I was still wanted to gamble. My mom was in Pennsylvania and I knew she was an enabler, and all I had to do was call her and say, "Hey, loan me a couple $100, I'll get it back to you." And we didn't have Venmo at the time. So I hop in my little Ford Ranger I had at the time and I drove north. And this was in the winter, right? I'm driving in rain, which eventually started turning into freezing rain as I got into Virginia. So I thought, okay, I can't do this. I got to turn around and go back. Well, I'm going over this bridge early on in Virginia. And of course, I hit ice, right? So the back end starts spinning. I'm like, okay, do what you're supposed to do, let off the gas, turn into it. All I did was spin around in a circle. Meanwhile, there was a tractor trailer trying to pass me at the same time, smacked right into me, right? And basically destroyed my truck.
Mm.
This was because I wanted to drive up to Pennsylvania to get money to come back and gamble with.
Yeah.
So
Wow. So when you were when this was all happening, at any point, you know, did you consider getting help, or were you still kind of in denial at that point, and like the boredom and the loneliness was just kind of blocking everything? Like at any point were you seeking help at this point?
I was not in denial that I had a problem.
Okay.
What I was in denial about was the fact that nobody at that time, at least as far as I was concerned, could have possibly understand what I was going through.
Right.
So I didn't even know what help to look for. I didn't
Mm.
even, I didn't even know what I didn't know at that point. And later in that year, that actually came to fruition because it was getting worse, getting worse. Now my family comes down; they're there too, right? We get it. We rent a house. We all move in. Thank God. But by now, the obsession has grown again to the point where I'm sitting in my office and I'm so fearful about what's going to happen, and so fearful about the fact that nobody could ever understand what I'm going through, that I had a bottle of painkillers I had there for my back because I have a bad back, and I ended up just pretty much taking the whole bottle right there in the office, and ended up on the floor. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital with my wife on one side of me and my boss on the other side saying, "You're going to get some help." And I was not stationed on a military installation at the time. I was remote. So I went to see a civilian counselor. My wife insisted on going with me because she's like, "We're going to get you fixed. We don't even know what's wrong with you, but you're getting fixed." So she insisted on going with me. I had already planned on lying to the counselor. So now I wanted to lie even more because I didn't want my wife to know what was going on. So I told the counselor basically what I thought she wanted to hear. I manipulated everything. She'd write everything down on a cute little pad. And we went on for about 2 months until she was satisfied things were better. My wife stopped complaining, and then we stopped doing it. But the whole time I was still gambling, the
Mm.
entire time. All I did was make up a bullshit story to get through it, you
Mm.
know? Um, so,
Wow.
and this just kept developing over that year. There was one at one, or over the next couple of years, actually. And there was one point when we were in South Carolina, my wife took the kids and drove up to Pennsylvania to visit family, but I was still working. Well, after she left, I took the car and I drove to this casino, which was several hours away. I brought a couple $100 with me. It had to be 4 or 5 hours away. So I drive all that time. I sit down. It's probably 2 to 3 hours in. I lose all my money. I drive all the way back to where I live. I go to this little personal loan place. I get I get about $1,000 more. I drive all the way back several hours to the casino again, and within an hour it was gone.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm.
just wacky, just crazy obsession.
And isn't it just amazing that you had that feeling of like there's no way anyone can understand what I'm going through? And if we only knew that there were rooms all over the country with filled with people that knew exactly what we were going through.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah. It's
God.
the reason, if I'm being honest, it's the reason I tried 4 times to end my own life.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
the very reason behind it, is me sitting there going, nobody could possibly understand the ridiculous thoughts that are going through my head right now.
God.
You know?
It's heartbreaking. Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, so you mentioned that your first clean date was 2007. Take us to what led to that what led to that date? When did you eventually, start to get
So
help?
I got stationed in Texas. At that point, my first wife separated from me. While I was
Hmm.
in Texas, the addiction went crazy again, and I started doing dumb stuff again. I stole again from my unit. This time it was electronic equipment instead of money, and got caught. Actually, I turned myself in again, right? But in the meantime, I was in this little room that was probably not much bigger than the office I'm sitting in now, with a wall that looked very much like this wall behind me, a brick wall. And so lost because I didn't know what was going on with me and nobody could figure me out that I cleared everything out of the way, got a good running head start, and ran headfirst into that wall as fast as I could a bunch of times.
Mm,
Um, and when I failed to kill myself, I'm like, I can't even do that right. Um, I took myself to the Naval Hospital and I ended up in a civilian acute psychiatric ward for 2 weeks. And during that time, again, my commander shows up, my officer in charge shows up. This time they're telling me I'm being let out of the Army. Um, and rightly so. Again, rightly so for the things I was doing. Now, fortunately, he said to me, we're going to let you out under honorable conditions so you can get the help you need.
okay.
Again, where I think that fell short is they don't know what that help looked like. They
Right.
didn't say, go look for this help. They're just like, go to the VA and get some help.
Right.
Right. So now here I am out of the Army, separated from my family. I drive back up to Pennsylvania, and for the next couple of years, it just continues to get worse until, and here was the catalyst for me to finally seek help. It's a Friday night, right? I'm driving down to my favorite casino here in Pennsylvania with about 500 bucks in my pocket. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go blow all this money because by now I just knew what was going to happen. So I get there Friday night. I get in there. I start, as I'm driving down there, I'm screaming to myself, turn around. You know what's going to happen. You're going to blow all your money. I'm punching the roof of my car and I look up in the mirror. And as I look up, I can see my face. I'm bright red, right? The veins are popped out and I can see the tears on my cheeks as I'm driving. Yet I'm still driving towards this casino, right? Like my foot is still on the gas and I won't stop. So I get there. I pull up into the parking lot. I'm still stressed. I go up, I open the door, I hear the sounds, I see the people and all that, and you might as well have shot me up with a substance because instantly I felt better, right?
Dave,
So
not to cut you off, I just got to say that, like, I say it every week how meetings are medicine. And when you meet someone and you hear their story, listening to you describe something that I did literally verbatim. Like, I can remember doing the exact same thing, crying on the way to
yeah,
this casino, screaming at myself. I did it on the way to Vegas. I've talked about it on this podcast. I cannot tell you, like, what it means to me to hear it again from someone new. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the power of recovery and the power of
oh yeah,
telling these stories. But I just I just appreciate you. But please keep going.
yeah, no, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, 100%. It's why I do what I do.
Mm,
Um, so I get up to the door, I open it up, and instantly I felt relief. So I walk in, I'm like, okay, let me sit down and start playing. Well, I went up. Not long after I'm in there, I went up, and I was a couple $1,000s up. So naturally, I played and I played and I played and I played and I played until eventually I started to run out of money. And tell me if this thought is new to you. And I've heard other people describe it this way too. But I couldn't wait to run out of money so I could leave, but I wouldn't leave until I ran out of money.
oh my God, I'm stealing that because that's so
Yeah.
true. That is so true.
So
Oh my
yeah.
God.
So
Say
and then
that one more
eventually,
time. Say that one more time for those at home. Say it one
okay,
more time.
I couldn't wait to run out of money so I could leave, but I wouldn't leave until I ran out of money.
Wow. Yeah.
Insane.
That
Insane.
is the compulsive gambler. That's what
Yeah.
we are. At the end,
Yeah.
towards the end, right? Like when everything's
Right.
numb and when it's just, oh my God. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So eventually I did run out of money,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I walked out of there and of course I'm so dejected, I'm so depressed, I'm so ashamed of what I had done. I get into the car and I'm like, okay, well, it's Saturday morning, let me go home, blah, blah, blah. I get in the car, I turn on the radio in the car and I hear religious music and I'm like, wait, why are they playing religious music on a Saturday? It wasn't Saturday, it was Sunday. I had been in that casino 36 hours and thought I was there overnight. Didn't
Yeah.
eat, didn't drink water. Um, barely made it to the bathroom the whole time I was there, and didn't realize as I was there 24 more hours than I thought I was. Did not realize it, had no idea. Even though, if you ever go to a casino, during the night the crowds slow down and then they build up, and I didn't pay attention to any of that. The only thing I noticed is there was more machines available. That's
Mm.
it. That's all I noticed. So I drive back from there dejected. I park in the parking lot of my local grocery store because that's where I did a lot of my thinking because nobody ever bothered me there.
Mm.
I sat there for the better part of a day and ended up taking a bottle of antidepressants.
Mm.
If you know anything about taking antidepressants, you don't take too many of them because you run the risk of seizures, right? They can kill you. So as I'm taking these things, I'm sitting there and I'm realizing I don't really want to kill myself. I just want somebody to understand what I'm going through and help me. So I turn myself into the local hospital, right into the psych ward. They make me drink charcoal slurry, which is, I don't recommend to anybody, by the way. They keep me overnight. I get up the next morning. I realize there's a paycheck, my final paycheck from my last job in the mailbox. Somehow I signed myself out against medical advice, right?
Mm.
I drive to that. This is the next morning after all this happened. I drive to my mailbox. I get the paycheck. I go cash it. I drive back to that same casino, and 2 hours later, that money's gone. And that's when I knew I needed. That's when I knew I, it was over. I had to find somebody that could help me at that
Mm.
point.
And so
So
and so where'd you go? Where'd you find help?
I had been going to the VA to get help, but
Mm-hmm.
never really paid attention. I had one counselor who would draw little circles and talk about your family, and one counselor who would talk about stress, and one psychiatrist who sat down with me for 3 minutes and said, "You have bipolar. Let me prescribe this to you." At which point I told her, "You're out of your damn mind. Bye." And I walked out. And then finally, a counselor reaches down in her desk. She pulls out this stapled packet of paper, has dust on it, right? She blows off the dust and sets it down in front of me. It says VA Gambling Treatment Program. So I look at it, and I'm like, okay. She goes, yeah, make the calls, find out what's going on. She wouldn't call with me. She just gave me the information so I could make the phone calls. I made the phone calls. I immediately got a hold of somebody. They did a screening with me. This was in early June 2007.
Mm.
They had a bed for me on June 18th of 2007, right? So they got me in. I said, okay, what's the harm? At least I'm getting away from gambling for 28 days. Maybe I can think this through and find a better way to do this, you know?
And at this point, are your kids and your ex-wife, do they know what's happening?
No, no.
So,
They knew at one point that I was in the VA hospital for an attempt,
mm-hmm.
but really had no clue what was going on because at that point she had started dating somebody else. She's still in South Carolina. I'm in Pennsylvania.
Mm.
And he basically, with her at the time, basically cut me off from my kids.
Right.
I went through 2 years without one word to my children, not one
Mm.
word. And I can't tell you the number of times I cried my eyes out over that,
Mm.
that it tore my heart out. Right. But at the time, I was so weak, I was so damaged that I knew that I had to take care of me.
Yeah.
So and I hate to say this because it sounds bad coming out of my mouth, but I couldn't worry about that.
No,
They were
it's
safe. I knew they were safe, and
right.
that's what mattered to me. I had to take care of me because I couldn't be there for them if I didn't take care of me,
Mm.
right? So
So
I
you,
drive out there,
yep.
and of course, on the way out to Cleveland, this is at the time Brecksville, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland, is where this program was. So it was about 6 hour drive for me, and of course, on the way, I stop and I gamble on the way. I'm like, I'm going to get my last hurrah and the whole 9 yards. So
Mm.
my clean date was the day I got there, June 18th, 2007. I get in there. The first thing I notice is I'm 6'1" and I normally run 195 to 210. I was 165 pounds. I was flaky white and you could see my ribs. Um, Tell me there's not a physical manifestation that goes along with a gambling addiction. I'll tell you, nope, don't agree. So anyway, I get in there, I go through all that, I get settled in, I meet my therapist that day for an introduction. And for the first time in 6 years, somebody understood what I was going through.
Mm.
For the first time in 6 years, somebody spoke in a language that made sense to me.
Do you
Then I
remember?
met
Do you
some of the
remember like
people.
some of the things she said?
Yeah, she talked about the gambling as an obsession. She's like, yeah, it can really feel like it's taking you over and that you have no control over it and that you have to do them. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
And then she would say, this is an addiction and it's treatable, you know?
Mm.
Um, And then I met the other people that were in the program with me, and they started saying, just like you said to me, how connected you were to that story I told you, the same thing. They started talking to me, and I'm like, really? I'm not the only person going through this?
Exactly.
And immediately I understood that I'm not alone anymore. On that first day, I understood that I wasn't alone anymore. Not too many days after that, I went to my first Gamblers Anonymous meeting, which we had to go to. There was one right there on the VA campus.
Mm-hmm.
I get to the meeting and I'm thinking, okay, we're going to hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and everything's going to be great, right? I was cynical. I'm not going to lie. I was cynical. So I get in there. We read this little yellow book. All right, that's cool. We're reading. This is great. We say a couple words, and then suddenly the first person gets up and starts talking about the topic of the evening. And I'm sitting there listening to this guy, and I'm like, how does this guy know about me? Right. And then the next person gets up. I'm like, wait, this person knows about me too. How did they hear about me? And on that night was the first night I got introduced to the power of connection.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'll
Man.
never forget that because it's to this day, connection is one of my pillars of recovery. Being
Mm-hmm.
connected to other people who get it. It's
Absolutely.
why I'm sitting here right now.
Amen.
You know.
So now, before we continue, I want to just kind of sum everything up that we just talked about. So, at any point, did you ever get any type of medication to help with the suicidal thoughts?
Yeah, I was given antidepressants.
Okay.
I guess I'll say they helped.
Mm-hmm. And
But
do you
what
take
helped the
anything
most?
now?
No, no, I don't.
So would you say that
Because
like all these thoughts were the product of just the addiction?
well, I also live with a level of clinical depression,
Mm-hmm.
which I still experience to this day. It's just I handle it way differently.
Right.
It's much more finite. I know that it's only going to last for a little while. I do mindfulness meditation. I talk about it,
Mm.
and what a different world.
Yeah.
But then I had no idea. I didn't know had to dealt with depression. I didn't know I dealt with anxiety. All I knew was, there was something very wrong with me.
Yeah, and it's
So
also just amazing that you went. So in 2001 in Korea, how old were you?
I was mid 30s.
Right. So you go 30 something years, and that compulsive gambler switch was never flipped.
Right.
It flipped in that moment, which is just, I have, most people, they say, oh yeah, I started when I was playing poker with my grandmother at 8 years old, or I
Right.
started when I went to college. So yeah, it's just fascinating. So unfortunately, I know we have one more relapse to talk about. But so once we're in recovery and you get out of that, take me through the next years and how did recovery progress and what ultimately led to the relapse?
Okay. Yeah. So in the meantime, as I'm going through all this, I went through 28-day program there. Then I went through aftercare there.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, I think it was a year just before I'd gone to that program, I got divorced. Um, had gone through 2 years without seeing my kids. Right.
Mm.
And I think I told you that already. But in
Yeah.
the meantime, as I'm in Cleveland, I stayed in Cleveland for a while and I started to feel healthy. Like I wasn't having urges. I felt stronger. And I'm like, wow, I'm cured. I don't need this stuff anymore. Stop going to meetings, stop going to my counselor. Ended up back here in Pennsylvania. I came back home to Pennsylvania and connected with the woman who was my high school sweetheart, right? That's a whole story in and of itself, which I'm not going to get into. But let's just say this: we
Different
ended up getting
podcast.
together. Huh?
That's a different podcast for a different day.
Yeah, yeah, it is. So we ended up getting back together, and in 2011, this was 2011. I came back to PA in 2009
Hmm.
and connected with her in 2011. We built our relationship built very quickly, but in the meantime, what was also happening was because I wasn't dealing with the addiction, it was remanifesting in a different way. So this time I came into my relationship with her with a credit card she knew nothing about and with other bills she knew nothing about. I wasn't huge into debt, but I had debt
Mm.
and I just didn't tell her about it. I was still hiding myself from people,
Right.
right?
Right.
So as this is going on and our relationship is building and in 2014 we got married, I'm hiding from this debt. And what I'm doing now is I'm taking out a loan to pay off this credit card so I don't keep getting bills for it. But now how am I going to pay off the loan?
Right.
Right? So this builds over years and years and years to the point where I had paid off my truck. I bought a new truck in 2013, had it paid off in a few years, and actually ended up buying it back from myself by taking an auto loan to pay off all these other loans I had, which then I had this chunk of money that I said, okay, I have a bunch of money left over. I'm just going to, she had flown to Houston to go stay with her son for a little bit because he was working down there. I ended up going to the casino to try and win it all back and solve all my problems at
Oh
once,
my
right?
God.
Now you're talking, it was probably 15,000 bucks or more that I
Oh,
took to a casino and blew in the course of about 6 hours.
oh
Done.
my. 15K in 6 hours?
Yeah. Yeah. I went hardcore.
And
I'm
was it
like, I
all,
just
was it
want this
always
over with. I
slots?
want to get out of here and be done with it.
And it was always
Um,
slots?
yeah, but it was the high dollar slots.
Right, right, right.
Yeah, I was slugging the big coins.
So now, so now between, June 18th, 2007 until this moment, or until you stopped going to meetings, looking back on it, were you getting a lot out of the meetings? Did you end up getting a sponsor? Were you just not ready? What do you think happened?
I felt like I had this. Like
Okay.
I got this. What I didn't realize was I didn't deal with the real issue, which was I grew up as an abused kid, divorced kid, heavily abused by an alcoholic, all this other stuff. So there was so much in me that I contained in me and never shared with other people,
Mm,
right? I hid from myself. I hid from everybody.
yeah.
I didn't start to deal with that. So little by little, that becomes a problem, which then creates stress, which then my go-to by now for stress is, of course, what? Gambling, right?
Yeah.
But there was also now the thrill of hiding. I have all these bills. Ooh, I got to get home and check the mailbox before anybody else does so I can see if the credit card bill's there. There
Mm,
was an adrenaline rush that went along with that. I'm not going to lie. It was the gambler mentality without physical gambling.
right. Yeah.
But
No, the mental gymnastics, the mental gambling that we do. Absolutely. Oh,
yeah,
so,
and that eventually did turn into gambling, right? And it
mm,
got so bad. This was 2019 now,
yeah.
right? We're going through 2019, and by now I had run out of ways to stop spending, to stop replacing the money. Meanwhile, all of our household bills, I took over all the finances,
Mm,
right? All of our household bills were being paid. I wasn't touching the money we were making from our regular jobs. And I don't know how I managed to do that, but I did,
and so she had no idea
until
you were gambling?
none. She did not have the slightest inkling that I was doing any of this
And did
through the
she,
entire time.
and did she know about your past at all?
Yes, I sat down and I told
Okay.
her about my gambling addiction, about being in recovery. That's as far as I went.
Right, right, right.
So this built up and built up over the end of 2019 to the point where January 3rd, 2020, I sat down on my couch on a Friday night and I said to her I was sick. I was going to stay on the couch for the weekend. During the course of that weekend, I sat and I thought through whether I was going to A, step back into recovery and admit everything that I had done because I knew that was going to be necessary, right?
Hmm.
And I knew how much it was going to suck and it could end my marriage and it could end my relationship with my kids. Or I had been walking around at that point for several weeks with a knife I had gotten, sharp as can be, and had she found out anything that I was doing prior to that moment, I was prepared to walk to the back of my property and end it. I had an exit plan in place and was fully prepared to do it. I tell this story when I'm telling my story, and as I'm sitting here looking at you, it's true, even though it gives me a chuckle every time I say it. As I'm sitting there during that weekend, Morgan Freeman's voice pops into my head from Shawshank Redemption saying, "Get busy living or get busy dying."
Oh
Right?
God, you just gave me the chill so bad.
And I
Jesus
kid you
Christ.
not, it happened. It
Oh,
happened.
oh.
So
Mm,
of course, I chose to get busy living. So on January 6th of 2020, it was a Monday. She went to work. I saw her off to work, and I immediately drove to my local VA. I walked in and said, "I feel like hurting myself. I need to be checked in." I said, "But I need to make a phone call first." And I walked outside and I called my wife. And this is one of those moments in my life that I will remember until the day I'm dead. And I told her why I was there. She had no clue. If you could have felt the betrayal and the shock and all of the things, I might as well have reached through that phone and just plunged a knife right into her back in that moment, right?
mhm.
And it's a moment I will never forget as long as I live. Um, because I took years of what she completely trusted everything that I said. and I just basically rolled it up and threw it in the garbage in 1 second, you know.
God.
So then for the next week, I was in acute treatment, acute psych treatment.
Yeah.
And the healing started after that.
Okay.
The real healing started after that.
So take us through. So that's obviously your clean date, and everything has been on the road to recovery since then. How is this time different than the first time? What did you do differently? Did things that you read or did people that you talked to, did it hit differently? Like what was the change?
I'm going to start with this. Um, I'm going to start with this. And again, I say this as I'm talking. The difference between 2007 and 2020, in 2007, I knew I had a gambling problem. In 2020, I knew I was powerless over it unless I continued to do something about it.
Mm,
So if I want to stay with my wife, if I want to keep the connection with my kids, if I want to live the kind of life that I truly want to live, then I better damn well be willing to step up and do the work. That's the difference. So I went back to the gambling treatment program February of 2020. In fact, I got out of the gambling treatment program just as COVID was starting to really rise up.
mm,
But anyway, I got out there and my therapist said to me, she says, "What do you want from this program?" I said, "I want to start to untangle what's beneath the manifestation of the addiction so that I can end this addiction once and for all and really, really be in recovery. You know, I know I have to live the rest of my life in recovery. I just want to figure out what that looks like." So I started a GA meeting that very week that I turned right after I got out of the hospital. I went to my first GA meeting here in PA, which I still go to this day. In fact, tonight is my meeting. I'm going tonight.
awesome.
I had a counselor once I left the gambling treatment program. I kept that counselor for another 6 months and took on another local counselor from my VA here, who I kept for over a year. Um, I started on the podcasts with Brian Hatch to tell my story. I started working with, and I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff. I started
Wasserman.
getting onto Jeff's
Yeah.
online gambling treatment group and working through that. I wrote my book. I started my own podcast, and all of this was geared towards two things. Number one, staying in firm contact with my recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And number two is raising the awareness to people that this is very real and that there is help.
Absolutely.
Um, and as I'm doing all this, the other thing that I did that I think really helped me is I made the decision to get uncomfortable. So anytime that my wife would ask me something, it started with her, that I didn't want to tell her the answer to, no matter how simple it was, my answer to her was, "I'm uncomfortable telling you this and I need to." And then I would tell her. And she'd be like, "Really? You were uncomfortable with that?" And I'd say, "Yes, I was uncomfortable with that." Right. But what it did is it opened the door for me to start talking about things I would never talk about with anybody else ever. And as I continued to do that, the uncomfortable became less uncomfortable. And as I started to let go of that, I started to notice without even really trying, I was telling the truth. And then I started feeling compelled to tell the truth. And now, if something's off with me, I would rather that she or anybody else be angry with me in that moment and work through it and move on than to hide from it. I no longer hide from things, right?
It's a,
And that to me is one of the biggest catalysts in my recovery.
yeah, I mean that's a beautiful thing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So talk about, you wrote the book, and obviously Fallen Gambling Resources, it's all about, it's obviously about recovery and gambling, but you want to focus on helping the military members and the veterans. So kind of just talk about how that all started, and talk about the book, and where can people find the book?
Sure. All right. Yeah. What got me into all this was I was asked years ago to speak at a Senate informational brief for some legislation to try and get better care for military service members with gambling.
Mm,
It sparked a passion within me to want to do this. So now I literally tell my story and I do trainings all across the country to talk about this because people don't even know what they don't know. I can't tell you the number of trainings I've done with military service members or retirees in there who've come up to me afterwards and go, "Yeah, I wasn't even aware of that until you said it. I'm so glad you said that." So that's why I started doing it. The book begins and ends with the exact same phrase. this is a story of hope, right? Even though it tells kind of the drudgery and the tale, it kind of goes through in more detail what I just told you.
Mm.
The idea is, number one, I tell that part of the story so people can connect with the fact that, yes, this really can happen. But the more important part of that is I then lead into what has been working for me in recovery and the fact that there is recovery available for people and that there is hope for people, right?
Yes.
That's what this book is about. This book is to connect with that person who was, when I wrote this book, the phrase that you and I just talked about not too long ago, nobody can understand the crazy thoughts that are going through my head. That's what drove me to write this book, to get people to understand that, yes, somebody can understand the crazy thoughts that are going through your head and there is help.
Mm.
So um, it started off, I released the paperback and ebook in 2023, right, which was available and it still is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and then some of the smaller book outlets.
Mm-hmm.
But then I just finished maybe a month and a half ago. I found a local studio with a fantastic guy who walked me through it, recorded it, and on May 6th, it was released on Audible, Apple Books, and Amazon Books as an audiobook.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. I saw that. I'm definitely going to be listening to it. I listened to the beginning of it, and you're right. First thing you said, there is hope. That might have to be the title of this episode. I don't know. I have so many. As you've been talking this whole time, I'm like, ooh, that's the title. Ooh, that's the title. Ooh, that's the title. So I guess
Just title it, "This is a story of hope."
yeah,
Because it is, you know?
I guess my last question would be, for the listener who's listening right now, whether they're in the armed forces or not, I think your story is so unique in the sense that you started late, and then there was obviously just so many. I mean, we talk rock bottoms. I mean, your rock bottoms are the lowest that there can be. Yet you're here. You're 5+ years away from a bet, and you've turned your life around, and you're doing all this amazing work. For the person that thinks like, oh, okay, yeah, but that's 5 years from now. Like, I can't think that far ahead. Like, what do you say to that person?
If what I'll tell everybody, and I kind of say the same thing to close up my own podcast, is if you are looking for help, if you're looking for a better way, if you're looking to be a better version of you, whether you're beginning to struggle with it, whether you want to better understand gambling, or whether you're in a full-blown addiction and have no idea what to do and don't even know what you don't know, the very first thing I would say is reach out for help. The 1-800-GAMBLER number is out there, it's nationwide, and somebody can help. If you're in crisis, 988. If you're in crisis and you're a veteran, press 1 right after you get on to 988, right? Look to Reddit. There's so many chat rooms on Reddit specific to problem gamblers. Listen to these podcasts. Listen to your podcast. I just listened the other day to Christina.
Mm.
And there are so many people that you have on and I have on and Brian has on and everybody has on that somebody can connect with our story and realize they're not alone. The biggest take-home message is you're not alone, and reach out and get some help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, this was amazing. I think this was like the quickest 59-minute conversation I've ever had in my life. I feel like we just started. I mean, that was a roller coaster. I can't wait to see you in July in Columbus. And I thank you so much. The name of the book is Fall In.
It's Fall In, A Veteran with a Gambling Addiction. It's the
Fall
full title
In,
of the book.
A Veteran with a Gambling Addiction. It can be found wherever books are sold, and definitely check out the audiobook. Dave, thank you so much for being on the Modern Meeting. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me. I really, really am grateful.
Awesome. All right. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back. I want to thank Dave Yeager. The name of his book is Fall In, A Veteran with a Gambling Addiction. Also, check out the Fall In podcast, available on all major platforms. I'm actually going to be on it soon, so very excited for that. And all of the other resources that Dave provides, and if you want to get in touch with him, you can go to daveyeager-fallin.com. His story was so powerful and honestly at times kind of hard to listen to. If you or someone you know is struggling, please consider seeking support. Help is available in the U.S. You can contact the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. That's available 24/7.
Guys, today is Monday, June 2nd, so that's 6 days away from the 8th, and you know what I do on the 8th of every month for the rest of my life, God willing? I will walk 12 miles for the 12 steps of recovery. Don't be shy. If you want to walk, let's go. Come on. It's fun-ish, but it's fun, and you'll feel good after, right? It's for a good cause, and yeah, we got a few people locked up. Pete and Ellie will be there. Hopefully I'll get her to make those cookies again. It'll be a lot warmer than it was back in February. Shirts will be here by then, the new ones. Pretty sure they're the exact color as the ones that Michael Scott wore, that the name of this is based on, if you haven't caught that joke yet. For any information about the Adam Lyons, the Modern Meeting 12-miler on the 8th of every month in honor of the 12 Steps of Recovery Fun Walk for the strength to get help because there is no cure, or anything else for that matter, email me at modernmeetingpod@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram at modernmeeting. So, as you know, nothing you're ever going to hear in the Modern Meeting, with the exception of our personal stories, is from us. Everything we talk about, we've either heard in these meeting rooms or we've read in the literature. It was a day or two after I had spoken to Dave and his story was just kind of rattling around in my brain, and I was either at the Tuesday or the Wednesday night meeting, and I was reading through the Day at a Time book, the little blue book that I try to read daily, and I stumbled upon something that I thought, this definitely needs to be at the end of Dave's episode. And once again, everyone has the right to choose whichever path they want when it comes to recovery. I don't know where my recovery is going to take me over the next days, months, years, but I do know that the foundation of my recovery is always going to be meetings. But that's just me. With all of that being said, here is what I read the other day, and it instantly made me think of Dave. When a person wakes up each morning and rises, with nerves screaming and sick at heart, to face frightening reality. When a person stumbles through the day in a pit of despair, wishing to die, but refusing to die. When a person gets up the next day and does it all over again. Well, that takes guts. That takes a kind of real basic survival courage. Courage that can be put to good use if that person ever finds his or her way into a 12-step meeting. That person has learned courage the hard way. And when that person comes to that meeting, he or she will find new and beautiful ways to use it. Have I the courage to keep trying one day at a time? Today I pray. May I put the guts to survive kind of courage left over from my gambling days into good use in the program. If I was able to hang on enough to live through the miseries of my addiction, may I translate that same will to survive into my recovery program. May I use my courage in new constructive ways. Today I will remember, God preserved me to help carry out his purpose. We'll see you on the other side.